Thank you so much for coming to my talk today, Salesforce Einstein 1 Studio Demystified. My name is Christine Marshall. I'm the Technical Content Director at Salesforce Ben. I'm in my 5th year as a Salesforce MVP, and I'm the co-leader of my local admin user group in Bristol. Now, what I like to do when I do these talks is talk a little bit about why I proposed them, why I wanted to do them. And I wanted to put this talk together because for the past 18 months, my feeling has been, I don't get it. I don't get it. I saw the announcements at Dreamforce, I went to some sessions at TDX, and I still didn't get it. So I wanted to understand, what is Einstein 1? What does it mean for us? If AI is not going away and it's going to become more important, then I need to know what's going on. So over the last few months, I have read every Salesforce help article on it, every press release, done every Trailhead module, done my own research, and I hope I'm now at a point where I understand it well enough to help you understand what's going on. But I'll be honest with you, this is the most nervous I've ever been to do a session because the information out there is really scarce. It's been really hard to figure out what's going on, how it all fits together, and what it means for us as builders. So in this session, we're going to cover what Einstein 1 Studio is. Then we're going to dive in to the 3 features of it. We're going to talk about the trust layer. We're going to recap on some of the jargon and demystify what that means in layperson's terms. And then I've also got some ways that you can get access to it and what the pricing looks like. But I want you to sit back and really enjoy this session. I don't want you to worry. I don't want you to try and remember it all. And I don't want you to feel like you have to take lots and lots of photos of the information. This presentation is probably the most text-heavy I've ever done because there's just so much information in it. So what I'm going to do at the very end is I've got a QR code, and it will give you access to these slides. So you'll have all of this information to take away and use whenever you want to. So without further ado, let's talk about what is Einstein 1 Studio. Well, it's a collection of 3 different features. We've got Copilot Builder, we've got Prompt Builder, and Model Builder. I'm going to talk about each of these individually in more detail. But there's a few things that set Einstein 1 Studio apart that you should know about. So number 1, you can customize the actions and prompts that are available to your users, so you control what they can do with AI. Einstein 1 Studio is grounded in your data. If you use a public-facing GPT, it doesn't have access to your data, and you shouldn't be putting your data in it either. And number 3, it's metadata aware. So not only is it aware of your data, of your records, but it's also aware of your configuration changes and your business setup. And the reason this is so important is it means it knows and respects your security configuration. It knows what level of access your users have, and therefore what records and information they should be able to see, and more importantly, what they shouldn't be able to see. Now, it's got loads of use cases. We could do a whole session on use cases, but here's just a few to give you a flavor of what it might do for your users. If we were in sales, we can summarize records. We can generate sales emails or identify our hottest deals. If we're in service, we can summarize case information, we can generate responses to customers, we can surface our knowledge articles, and we can also automate our case approvals. And in marketing, perhaps we want to generate a survey to a customer after they've made a purchase, create landing pages, and also optimize our messaging and emails. First up, let's talk about Copilot and Copilot Builder. So what is Copilot? Copilot is the front end. This is where your users are interacting with Einstein 1 Studio, and it uses natural language for users to be able to request a task. And then what happens is Copilot interprets that request and figures out what the right action or actions is to perform it. So in real layperson's terms, actions are simply how Copilot gets things done. And it's a bunch of tasks that it can perform for you and for your users. This I find really interesting. One of my big stumbling blocks was, but how do we get from the chat interface, which is using natural language, to actions and prompts, which are things that it's doing? How does it know? Not just because it's magic. It's called the reasoning engine. So your user is sat using Salesforce, hopefully inputting their data. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? And they're talking to Copilot, and they might say, summarize the Acme deal. So that's happening at the user front end. This then goes into the reasoning engine, and a plan is created, and actions are identified that meet that request. Then Copilot shows the results to the user back in the front end. So this middle section here is where all the magic is happening. So it comes with plenty of out-of-the-box actions, which I've listed on these slides. But I just wanted to highlight a few of them to you, which I think are really interesting, and give you some examples of what a user might type into that front end to get a result. If I was a service user, I could say, what is the policy for returns over 30 days? And that would call the answer questions with knowledge action. If I was a sales user, I could say, help me write an intro to Steve from Acme. And that would call the draft or revise sales email action. And then it starts to get really smart. Now, a few of these things are still in beta. But if I said to it, how many opportunities were created in the past 5 days, it would call the query records with aggregate action. So you can start to see how this could become really, really useful for identifying your hottest deals, deals closing soon, and you can get more and more granular and specific. What if none of those actions do what you need? That's not a problem. That's where we get to Copilot Builder. Now, this is where you can create custom actions. And some examples of custom actions could be to get order details, to initiate an order return, make product recommendations to a customer, check inventory levels, create and modify invoices, or log internal IT tickets. So this is the front end that we're talking about, the actions that will then pull the prompts, which leads us on nicely to Prompt Builder. So if Copilot is the front end, you can think of Prompt Builder as the back end. Now, I thought it would be really useful to talk about prompts in a use case that we can all understand. So a week tomorrow, I'm going on holiday, and I can't wait. So a few weeks ago, I wanted to find a holiday, and I went onto a travel provider's website. Now, this website has thousands of hotels, hundreds of destinations, tons and tons of flights. But until I give it information telling it what I want, it's not going to return anything useful to me. And that is, in essence, a prompt. So by telling this database where I'm going from, where I want to go to, when I want to go, how long I want to stay, it can start to give me specific results that meet my need. And then I can get even more granular, and I can say, well, I only want to stay in 5-star hotels because I'm bougie like that. And I can also say it must be adults only because I hate children. And by giving it even more instructions, it narrows that search and gives me the most useful information back. So at a very high level that we can all understand, that is what a prompt is. We can all do that. But what is a prompt in this context? Well, prompts are what are powering Copilot in the front end. And this is where you, as the builders, give it instructions, contextual information, and constraints, what not to do. Now, to help you out, it comes with prompt templates. So these are the things that you can do with it. You've got email templates. You can ask it to configure sales follows up, service emails, field generation. You can ask it to fill in your description field. You can do record summaries. And then if none of those meet your needs, we have flex templates, which allow you to do far more unique things. But what does it look like in practice? So this is Prompt Builder in the back end. And the first thing we have is our prompt template workspace. And this is where you enter your natural language prompt. So you might say, I want to write an email to this lead about this new product. And you might also give more information like make it friendly but professional, include a pun about my new product. Now, the next thing you do is select your resources. And by resources, I'm actually talking about merge fields, which we are all familiar with. So it's here that you can start inputting things like merge fields, so you can do dear first name, or you can add in your custom fields, and it's actually going to pull in data from your Salesforce org. Next, we have our resolution. We can view our prompt with record data. Then we have our response. So this is where we can preview the response that it's going to get, and we can also start to test it and make sure it's going to give us the information that we expect and nothing too outrageous. And then lastly, configuration. And this is where you choose your model, your large language model, to use. And we're going to talk about why that's so important in the next session. Now, writing a good prompt is quite complicated. There's actually quite a lot to think about, and we don't have time to go into it today. But Andrew Cook, who is sat at the front here, wrote this article, 5 example prompts, where he actually goes into a great amount of detail on the type of inputs you need. So QR code there for you if you're interested in having a play. Don't worry if you don't get the QR code, because I will share my slides. Model builder. Now, this is actually my favorite bit. I think this is super interesting. But first of all, we have to understand what large language models are. So they are advanced artificial intelligence systems, and they use deep learning techniques to understand and translate human language. Now, they typically have hundreds of millions to billions of parameters. They hold a huge, huge amount of data, and that's what allows them to understand complex patterns in language. And they can also be trained. So we can give it more information, ask it to do tasks, and then let it know whether it was right or wrong, and it learns from that. We've got fine-tuning. So fine-tuning means making a model an expert in a specific area. We might have large language models that are more appropriate for things like the finance industry. And then versions. Large language models keep getting more and more intelligent. With each version, they learn from the previous. Now, why does that matter here? Well, in Einstein 1 Studio, you can combine your company data from Salesforce with your preferred large language model. You have complete control over the model you choose, and you can manage this from a control plane that uses clicks and not code. And why is this important? Well, different use cases, data residency, compliance concerns might require a different large language model. And that's why, that's all the hype. That's what it's all about, is that you can choose which one meets your needs. So next, let's talk about the trust layer, because trust is Salesforce's #1. And I want to show you how this is working. So if we look over in the corner here, CRM apps, that is our Salesforce org. That's our sales user chatting away to Copilot in the front end, asking it for help, saying, I want to identify my top hottest deals closing in the next month. It's going to move over into that reasoning engine where it figures out the right actions and the right prompts. And then it goes all the way through to the models. Now, the important thing here is there's 0 retention. So that model doesn't store any of your data. It comes back out, it goes through toxicity detection, so that's to make sure there's no bias, no offensive outputs. It also has an audit trail, so we can always see when these were used and what the output was. And then it pops back out the front end in front of our user. Now, the Einstein trust layer has lots and lots of benefits. So it's masking your sensitive data. You never want to share personally identifiable information. It's also got secure data retrieval. Now remember, it's metadata aware, so it knows what your user can and cannot have access to. It's not going to reveal data that they shouldn't be able to see. It checks for toxic output, so bias, inappropriate language, and any other form of offensive content. Now, because there's a 0 retention policy, we're going to avoid data leaks, and it's going to help you remain in compliance. And then lastly, if there is an issue, you can use the audit trail. Now, something that I think is relevant here, although not specific to Einstein 1 Studio, is why this is all so important, why the 0 data retention is important. And that's because, as I said, we shouldn't be sharing personally identifiable information. We also shouldn't be sharing intellectual property that belongs to our companies. And examples of that could be things like your Apex code. That should not be going into a public-facing GPT because it stores it to learn from it in future. So just a quick heads up if you are using ChatGPT, and who isn't, don't put information that is intellectual property. That should not be going into a public-facing GPT. I want to recap then on some of the jargon, some of the terms that I just didn't know what that meant. So the first being generative AI. So Gen AI models create new data by finding patterns in data inputs. So a good example of this might be you could ask it to create an original short story by looking at existing short stories. Natural language processing, or NLP. Now that's the type of AI that allows us to use conversational interfaces, speech recognition. NLP is how we're using Copilot at the front end. Metadata aware, my favorite. It's aware of your data and your metadata, including your security configuration. Grounding. Now that's another term I just didn't understand. What does grounding mean? Well, it means it's anchored in your data. So it has access to your data, allowing it to be context aware. Now, a Copilot, that is simply the conversational interface that you use. Prompt engineering, identifying inputs or prompts that result in meaningful outputs. And a large language model, might also see it as an LLM, is just a type of a deep learning model trained on a large data set that can then interpret natural language and perform tasks for you. A couple of examples of some of the main ones. Most of you will be most familiar with ChatGPT. And as a reminder that they vary, large language models are not made the same. There are lots and lots of different types based on how much data they have in them and the type of tasks that they do or whether or not they've been fine-tuned. Pricing and access. So thank you to everyone who actually showed up here, because this is not something that we get by default in our Salesforce orgs. You do have to pay for it. They have new Einstein 1 editions that come with access to Einstein 1 Studio. I don't want to read out the list price, but I'm sure you could talk to your AE. The Einstein 1 add-on allows enterprise and unlimited customers to upgrade. If you work for an ISV, though, you can get access via the Partner Learning Camp and get a partner dev org. And most importantly, for us here in the room, you can also get an Einstein 1 free trial in an AI-enabled dev org. Now, you only get 5 days, but you will need this if you want to complete some of the relevant Trailhead modules, like the Einstein Copilot and Quick Start Prompt Builder projects. So that's how you can get in and have a play with this if you want to. Use Andrew's article that we talked about earlier and have a go at building some of these prompts. So, some resources for you. A very high-level guide to Einstein 1 Studio that I wrote, and then get started with Einstein Copilot and get started with Prompts and Prompts Builder, which were written by Andrew. And this just gives you some use cases and some more information, also some detailed instructions on how to build some of these actions and these prompts. But most importantly is this QR code. So this QR code will give you access to the slides to use as you will, but to refer back to anything that we've talked about today. And you can, if you want to use it to educate your businesses and your IT directors or your VP of sales, feel free to go ahead. I hope I've done the heavy lifting for you to really demystify Einstein 1 Studio and simplify it in a way that we can all understand what it means and how all the pieces fit together. Now, I'm running pretty close to time, so what I will suggest is once I get off the stage, I will stand over there, because I think if anyone has any questions, they're probably going to be a bit more in-depth, but I'm happy to answer questions and have a bit of a chat. But I really, really hope this has gone some way to help you understand what Einstein 1 Studio is. And thank you all so much for coming to this session.